All right, so I'm going to start out in Ableton just for a moment or two, and then I'm going to jump over to Pro Tools because Pro Tools is where I know how to be most visual with these tutorials. But I wanted to start out in Ableton for this one because when you go to export in Ableton, the option to normalize is there, and more often than not, it's the Ableton users that I get normalized audio from because it gives you the option right when you export versus a lot of the other DAWs. It's a plugin or an audio suite VST that you have to go and then you have to apply it individually. So that's why I wanted to start out here. And if you're wondering how to normalize, when you go to export, Command-Shift-R if you're on a Mac, and then you select normalize on. But I'm going to encourage you to avoid normalizing for the most part, and I'm going to show you why right now. All right, so now I'm in Pro Tools, and it's going to make a lot of sense in a moment of why I switched over to Pro Tools to show you this because I can be more visual. And anyways, the first thing that I should explain is what normalizing is. So if I'm going to go over here, I'll show you something right here, and I'll blow this up so we can see it a little bit more. So what normalizing is going to do is it's going to take the highest peak of an audio file, like maybe right here, and it's going to bring it up to 0 dB because in the digital world, 0 dB is as loud as you can go. You can't go any louder. When you do go past it, you start to get nothing but clipping and distortion, and it sounds really bad. So what I'll do is I'll show you, we're going to normalize this, and it's going to take one of these peaks, that's the highest in the audio file, and it's going to raise it to 0. Now, this is something that's already been mastered, so it didn't really show too much of a drastic change. So let me decrease this, and we'll get drastic here. So now we're seeing, and we can see the peaks a little bit more and what they're doing here, and we see we got a high peak there and another high one there. So what it's going to do is raise that closer to 0. See how we just brought that up? All right, now if I go back to its original source, so obviously not much change in quality right there because it was already mastered and stuff like that. I do got a couple examples of audio that's not mastered. So what normalizing is going to do, though, is not only is it going to bring it up to 0, but it's going to increase the gain without affecting the dynamic range, which means it's not going to have the effects that a compressor has or a limiter on there. So because of that, it can be both a good and bad thing. It can be good because if you want to send over some audio that's louder and you don't want to mess with any compression or affecting the dynamics or the transients or anything like that, you'll be able to do that with normalizing. The bad thing, though, is sometimes or oftentimes you'll need to have some type of dynamic control so you can avoid certain things from clipping or becoming too loud or jumping out at you. More often than not, you're not going to use normalizing, and I'm going to get to that in a moment of why you shouldn't and why you should avoid it. But here are a couple reasons of why you should. I'm going to get this right out of the way right away. So one reason why you might want to is if you're sending a song to a client or a collaborator and it's just like a quick rough mix, or if it's something that you want to listen to in your car, and it's quick and you really don't know how to use a limiter and you don't want to learn how to use a limiter, what you could do is you can normalize it. So here's an example of a song over here that has not been mastered yet or anything like that, and let's say it's a rough mix that you want to get out real quick to your collaborator or your client, and just so they have something, and when they put it in their car, they don't have to crank their volume on their stereo system. So you can see this is fairly quiet. So if we normalize it, we've really increased that gain. Keep all your goodbyes. I try. I think I am. Another time that you might want to normalize is if an audio file is so low in volume that increasing the gain or the volume control or adding a limiter or any type of dynamic effect in there is just not being able to fix it, you may need to normalize it. And if re-recording is not an option at that time, because that's the first thing you should do. If it is so low in volume that it's not usable, you'll want to try to re-record it. But if you can't, then normalizing is when you can. So I got an audio clip.
Saw you at midnight.
So let's say that we recorded this and it's so low, right? It's like this.
Saw you at midnight just by the fire.
And even when we max it out, like nothing's working here. So what we might want to do is we might want to normalize that.
Saw you at midnight just by the firelight. I knew I had to see what.
That's one reason why you might want to. And I'm going to get back to this audio file in a moment because there's a reason actually why I have it in here and to show you one of the things. And you may have already noticed of what the issue of that audio file could be right there when you normalize. All right, so the last reason why you might want to normalize is when you're creating testing tones, such as like a sine wave, calibrator, white noise, or pink noise singles, then you'll want to normalize those so those are right at 0. So those are the 3 reasons why you would want to normalize, and now I'm going to tell you every reason why you should not. So the big reason and time that you would not want to use it is when you're sending files to a mix or mastering engineer, like when you're sending stems to get mixed, or when you're sending a full 2-track stereo mix to get mastered. A lot of times you'll be tempted to click that normalize button, especially if you're in Ableton, because it's just right there for you, because a lot of times people perceive loudness as better. But the problem when you do that is you're going to take away all the headroom. So if this was a song right here that we went to get mastered and we did this,
think I am high.
We've now taken away all the headroom for the engineer to be able to master it. And then you can see,
Think I am high. Think I am.
if I go to limit this,
Think I am high. Think I am gone. And baby,
when I bring it up to an area of where get it to CD level, it's already starting to distort and clip, even though that's the level that's pretty standard for mastering for CD or, like, let's say SoundCloud, because the headroom has already been taken away, and so that's an issue right there, and you don't want to take away headroom for an engineer. Another reason why you don't want to use normalizing, and a lot of times people will use this in other DAWs to get their audio files to look bigger. So let's say, this is pretty small and you want to normalize it just so this actual waveform looks bigger on the screen. Well, there's other ways to do that, and a lot of DAWs give you the option to increase the size of the wave there. You would rather just increase it visually with the option to just make it magnify versus try to normalize it so it looks bigger to you. So another reason why you don't want to do it, when you're trying to mix, right, you really want to avoid normalizing files, because when you're mixing, let's say we got a track here. Right, and then we go to normalize it. Now that might sound good by itself, but the problem is once you start to normalize all these tracks, you got all these tracks that are now normalized and at 0, so combined you're going to have a lot of issues here. So let's hit that. So you see we got a whole bunch of issues. We got clipping, we got distortion, we're maxed out, the headroom's gone, and it's going to sound really bad on iPhone and Android speakers, laptop speakers, earbuds, Bluetooth speakers. It's going to sound bad on all of those issues, especially with the low end. You see that we've taken that and really drastically changed that. So then something else to take into account of why you want to avoid it when you're mixing is you've now brought it to 0. So the second that you go to boost something on an EQ, you're for sure going to be dealing with clipping. See, I'm only getting this, just increasing this a little bit here, and we're already dealing with that. And same with if you add any other type of processing on it, like a compressor or a little bit of saturation or anything like that. Once the processing is going on there, you're going to start to deal with clipping because, again, you have no headroom, so there's no room for processing anymore. So one issue too that you have to consider when normalizing is that sometimes it can deteriorate your audio quality, meaning that it lowers the quality because sometimes you'll be dealing with some clicks, pops, harshness that can all occur when normalizing. So we got this track and there's already a little vinyl effect on there, but when we go to normalize it, those little cracks and stuff start to become a lot more harsh, and the quality is also lowered too because it's going to start affecting the peak samples in there as well. So something else to consider when normalizing, I'm going to come back to this vocal right here, and this is the whole reason why I got this track in here, is when you normalize, not only is it going to increase your highest peak and bring up the overall volume, but it's going to increase that noise floor as well. So this is a track that has a little bit of tape hiss on it, and it's recorded with tape. So when I hit play, you can hear that tape's in there a little bit, right?
Saw you at midnight just by the fire.
Now when you go to normalize, that tape hiss is going to increase as well.
Saw you at midnight just by the firelight. I knew I had to see what it feels like.
So you can hear it throughout. It's a lot more audible now that it's been normalized because it brings up that whole entire noise floor as well. So I just gave you a lot of reasons that can affect when you normalize. So what I'm trying to get at is that more often than not, you should avoid normalizing. And there's a lot of other techniques that you can do to bring the overall volume up of your audio. You can get it mastered professionally. You can master it yourself by using a limiter right here. You can do things to control the dynamic range. You can do things with gain staging and turn the volumes up and try to get a better balance. And so there's definitely a lot more options to avoid normalizing. And a lot of times normalizing can damage the quality of your audio. It can make things really hard for an engineer, and it can really just create a lot of harshness and distortion, and it takes away all the headroom and just makes things a little bit more difficult. So that is normalizing explained, and hopefully you got a better understanding of what it is. And now when you go to export your audio and you see the little normalize option, you will know what that does now and whether you should do it or not. So I'm hoping that you got a lot out of this tutorial today. Hopefully there's some information that was useful. If you're getting a lot out of this but you want to see more, please feel free to comment below. Let us know what kind of tutorials that you want to see in the future, and Oracle and I can definitely make that happen. We're always trying to find the content that you want to see. If you're liking what you're hearing from me, you can find me everywhere on social media at Realistic Productions. You can find me at the web, realisticproductions.net. You can find my man Soundoracle everywhere at Soundoracle. And if you're looking for the best 808s, the best kicks, the best snares with the craziest loops and samples you can find on the internet right now, go to soundoracle.net. All right, till next time.
From Soundoracle.com.